Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Home in Progress by Repco Light Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And first things first, I've got to get this out of the way right away. Last weekend, there was a mistake at the station, and they ended up airing the same first segment 2 weeks in a row. I apologize about that. Unfortunately, it was a segment about me, grating cheese for pizzas and accidentally grating my knuckles as I did so. So it was a little gross, and you had to hear it twice, And again, I apologize about that. It was out of my hands, but I apologize. However, some good came out of it. One of our contractors, Joe, I won't say his last name because he didn't give me permission to do so, but one of our contractors, Joe, heard that segment this second time, and he sent me a link for a gourmet Rotary grating tool. I mean, this thing is absolutely amazing. You slap it on your counter. It's got a little suction cup thing that holds it in place, and it will grate cheese. It will chop vegetables, all kinds of things. I don't have to touch it. I just put the stuff in a little hopper, and I got a little tool to kind of mush it down, and I just spin it, and it grates it automatically. It's hands-free. So I'm not going to be grating parts of myself into the pizzas, into the cheese for the pizzas anymore. That's great for everybody. I'm just so pleased with this. Now, of course, the model that he sent me, the link to the model that he sent me was a primo model. Absolutely primo. And so far out of my budget that I almost passed out when I saw the price tag. Because when I saw the picture, I was pumped. When I clicked the link and saw the price tag, that's when I passed out. But when I came to, I searched further online and found something similar. The cheapo fake version. I found that, something that I could afford. And I bought it immediately. I had it within hours. And it's now sitting proudly in my kitchen waiting to be called into service. I'm just hoping that the cheapo model won't, who knows? Maybe I'll be finger-free next week, and I'll tell you about the mishap that happened. It still won't be Joe's fault, though, because Joe linked me to the real deal. I cheaped out. But anyway, I'm super pumped. Every time I make pizzas, I'm going to think about Joe. Every time my family eats pizzas that are topped only with cheese and legit pizza toppings, they're going to think of Joe. So anyway, I wanted to talk about that a minute. Now, that's out of the way. Let's get on to business, and let's talk about the weather. Now, I know we're in April, and I know we've had some decent days, but I'm still leery, right? Still leery, still a little cautious. This is Michigan, after all. I made it through March, but if we get a lot more cold weather, which we undoubtedly will, I know it's coming. When that happens, I'm going to be so crabby because cold weather this time of year always brings out the child in me. Not the happy child. The one tossing a temper tantrum in the grocery store because he wants a candy bar and mom said no. I don't want a candy bar. It's an analogy. I could have said that a lot cleaner. It's an analogy. But what I do want is to go outside and not have to scrape a layer of frost off the windshield for any number of reasons. One, because I'm sick of it. I'm sick of scraping frost off, and I'm sick of being cold. And two, this is probably the biggest reason, I'm short, and I drive a ridiculous truck. It's a work vehicle, and I'm very appreciative. It's wonderful to have this. But I need to be picked up every morning and lifted into the driver's seat, basically. Or I need a running start, and then I need to jump to get in. So you can only imagine what scraping the windshield is like for me. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. I'm sick of the cold weather. I'm sick of March, all of that. But we're heading into April, and that means that eventually the weather's going to get consistent and warmer, and spring is eventually going to get here. And when that starts to happen, in fact, it's already starting to happen right now, when the weather starts to turn even a little bit, people start asking about exterior painting. They want to know, when is it okay to get outside and start working? Well, years back, you had to wait for temperatures between 50 and 85 degrees. However, in the early 2000s, paint manufacturers, Repcolite among them, started releasing exterior paints that could be used in temperatures down to 40 degrees and less. And the actual labels on those cans usually say down to 35 degrees, which is really kind of nuts. It's just above freezing. Products that do that really change when your painting season can begin. But of course, it's not just straight up that easy. There's a catch or a caveat. Or a few concepts to keep in mind. Temperature is only one piece of the puzzle. There are a couple other factors that matter just as much, maybe more. And if you get these wrong, it doesn't really matter what paint you're using. So let's walk through them. The first thing you need to keep in mind is something most homeowners don't think about, and it's this. The temperature that we see on our phones, that's just the air temperature. But what actually matters when you're painting is something that we talk about all the time on the show here. It's the surface temp. The temperature of the siding, the wood, the trim that you're putting paint on. And those can be very different. The air temperature to the surface temperature. They can be very different. Picture the west side of your house on a cool spring morning. The air might be 55 degrees. Feels fine out there. Maybe the sun is starting to warm things up. But that west wall's been in the shade all morning. That surface might easily still be hovering around 40 degrees or lower, depending on the night temps. And it's possible it could be too cold for the paint. So surface temperature, keep that in mind. And if you're curious about how you figure that out, just get a very inexpensive infrared thermometer. $20, you can pick this up, and it will tell you what that surface temperature is. And you can use it on all kinds of other things. People use it for cooking and grilling and all kinds of other things. But it will definitely help you figure it out, the surface temperature, when you're painting. So we've got air temperature and surface temperature covered. Now let's talk about dew point. Dew forms when the surface gets cold enough that the moisture in the surrounding air can no longer stay airborne. It condenses, it settles onto the surface as water droplets, and the temperature where that happens is called the dew point. So the general rule when you're painting outside is that your surface temperature should be at least 5 degrees above the dew point before you start painting. A lot of pros like 10 degrees just to be safe. This isn't really all that complicated. Maybe it sounds complicated, but it's not. Our phone's weather apps usually give us the dew point. Just compare that dew point to the surface temperature. If your surface temperature is 55 and the dew point is 48, you're in good shape. If they're getting close and that surface temperature isn't more than 5 degrees over the dew point, it's probably worth waiting a bit. And this becomes especially important at the end of the day because as the temperature drops, you can get into trouble pretty quickly. All right, now let's talk about moisture in the surface that you're painting. This is one that can absolutely ruin a paint job. And it's really common this time of year. Wood is porous. It absorbs water. And after a wet winter, after rain in the spring, that moisture can still be inside the wood, even if the surface feels dry in the sun. And even previously painted surfaces, they're not immune. Water can get in through cracks, it can get in through end grain, it can get in around trim and so on. Metal and vinyl, they're different. You don't have moisture inside of them. But wood and masonry, you got to pay attention. And no amount of good prep, no amount of primer, no amount of premium paint is going to save you if the wood or the substrate is too wet. That moisture gets trapped, it tries to escape, and eventually it's going to take the paint with it. Peeling, bubbling, failure. So what do? How do you know when a surface is dry enough to paint? Well, there's another relatively inexpensive tool that can come in really handy, a moisture meter. It's a little handheld gadget. It's going to tell you how much moisture is in the wood or the surface or whatever. You're looking, in this instance, if you're painting outside, you're looking for a number below 15%. Once you start getting above that, you're taking on risk when you continue to paint. If it's pushing 20%, just walk away and let it keep drying. Again, this is not an expensive tool, but it's one that can save you from a lot of headaches. Now, speaking of headaches, here's something that causes a fair amount of them when people are painting outside in the early spring. It's called surfactant leaching. And we've talked about it a lot in the past, usually in regards to bathrooms, but it applies outside as well. See, inside your paint are compounds called surfactants that help the paint spread and adhere and do all kinds of paint things. Under normal circumstances, normal conditions, you never even really notice that they're there. But if you, let's say, paint too late into the early evening in, early spring or late fall, and the paint doesn't have time to dry before the temps drop overnight and dew forms, well, those surfactants can get pulled to the surface. And what you end up seeing are streaks. Sometimes shiny, sometimes slightly discolored, usually more noticeable on darker colors. Here's the classic scenario. You've got a beautiful 62-degree afternoon. So you paint the sunny side of the house. Everything feels perfect, right? You nailed it. But then the night comes in and it drops down to 38 or so. Dew forms and the paint was still curing. Now you end up in the morning, you find streaking on the house. You don't wake up streaking. Oh, please, no. Don't wake up streaking. You wake up, get dressed, fully dressed. You go outside and you find streaking on the house. People have a meltdown at that point. Now, the good news is that it's mostly cosmetic. It's going to fade over time. But it doesn't look great right at the beginning. And it's kind of the thing that really, really frustrates people. The way around it is relatively simple. Don't just look at the daytime high. Pay attention to what's going to be happening overnight too. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do, and this is probably the best thing you can do, and it's going to help you with a lot of the different variables or situations that we've been talking about, it's to use the right product. And I'm not talking about just a low temp paint. That's important, but this is something a little different than that. It offers a little more than just being a low temp paint. Benjamin Moore's Element Guard. It's definitely something to consider here. We talk about it a lot on the show. It came out a couple years ago, but I really like this product. First off, it can be applied at low temps, like we've been discussing. But more importantly, it's rain resistant, it's moisture resistant in as little as 60 minutes. Most exterior paints need several hours before they can handle any moisture. Element Guard is formulated to handle humidity, damp conditions, even wind-driven rain much faster. And what's really interesting to me is you can control a lot of the things that we talked about. You can paint at the right time. You can make sure that the surface isn't damp and all of those things. You can do all the right prep work. But it's not possible to control the weather. We can watch the weather, see what we think is coming, but we can't control it. Element Guard kind of gives you that silver bullet or that safety net against the unexpected. Okay, so Element Guard from Benjamin Moore. Think about that if you're painting outside. Before I wrap all of this up, let's bring everything together into what I hope is a simple schedule for painting outdoors. In the morning, generally speaking, don't rush it. Wait for the dew to burn off, check your surface temperature, and then make sure you're at least 5 degrees above the dew point. Now, traditionally, most painters aren't starting outside until 9 or 10 in the morning this time of year. With a product like Element Guard, you can often move that up a couple hours, which adds up over the course of a project. So if you're a contractor on a schedule, Element Guard, again, another reason to think about it. You can start earlier. During the day, you're going to want to follow the sun around your house. Start on the east side, move south, then west. Avoid surfaces that are getting too hot in direct sunlight if you run into that. When it comes time to stop, give yourself a buffer. 2 to 3 hours before sunset is a really good rule of thumb in cooler weather. You want that paint to start setting up before temperatures drop and moisture becomes an issue again. And one last thing, don't forget the overnight forecast when you're looking at this and planning things out. Our favorite rule of thumb is this. If it's going to be 40 degrees or higher for 24 hours after you paint, you're good to go, as long as you're using a low temp paint. If it's lower than that, or it's going to dip lower at night, lower than 40, you might want to wait. Even though the label on the can says 35 degrees, we like to stick to 40 because it's just a really good precaution. All right, one last quick tip that I've got for you if you're working outside this time of year. It's going to make a bigger difference than a lot of people think. Keep your paint inside overnight. Don't leave it in the garage, the cold garage. If the garage is heated, leave it out there. You can live out in the garage like that. But if it's like my garage, don't leave it there. It's going to get cold. And a can that's been sitting at 38 degrees, overnight, doesn't behave the same way as one at room temperature. It's thicker, it's harder to spread, it doesn't cover as well. Just bringing it inside the night before helps everything go on smoother. All right, if you're thinking about tackling a project this spring, stop out at any Repcolite and we'll walk you through exactly what you need to know for whatever you're working on. All right, let's shift gears just a little bit. I want to go from talking about painting outside to painting inside. I've been doing a fair amount of that over the last couple of weeks, and there's some interesting things that I picked up and learned along the way. We're going to get to that right after this. Home in Progress is brought to you by Repcolite Paints and Benjamin Moore. People often think of paint as just another line item on the project supply list. But here's the thing. Everything you do, every hour of prep, every stroke of the brush, all comes down to the quality of the paint. The paint is the project. Make sure it's the best. And we're back. You're listening to Home in Progress by Repcolite Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And I don't have tons of time on this segment because I kind of went long on the last segment. So I want to jump straight in, get straight to it. My kid has a new house, and he's been doing a complete repaint over the last couple weeks. Just complete repaint. Everything's getting a new coat of paint. And I've helped him with some of it. Not tons of it, but I've done a couple rooms. And I've been there, kind of to coach. Right? That's what dads are supposed to do. We're supposed to coach from the sidelines, and I've also helped him, get the right products and all of that stuff. All right. I talk about paint on the radio all the time, but I don't always get all kinds of opportunities to use every single product out there. And so when I do get that chance, I'm always really interested to see what I find. So getting this opportunity to actually use some products, I was really interested. And one of the products that we chose through most of the house is Repcolite's Optima. Optima is a top-of-the-line water-based paint that we make. It comes in a full range of finishes, from matte all the way up to semi-gloss. Just top-tier product. It's suitable for walls, for trim, for cabinets, you name it. I've talked about it on the show a lot. I haven't used it personally a ton. This was going to be my first real opportunity, really cranking out a lot of different spaces with Optima. And here's what I ran into that really surprised me. I knew it was going to hold up and do well on the surfaces that he was painting. Here's what really kind of caught me off guard. Caleb and his fiance picked some really, really some incredibly dark colors. That's what I'm trying to say there. They picked some really dark colors for several of the rooms in their home. And dark colors typically don't cover very well. They're notorious for not covering well. And looking at the colors that they had chosen, I was thinking we're going to need at least 3 coats of paint. So I'm psyching myself up for that when I went to help him with the painting, to help him get started with the process. Caleb hadn't done a lot of painting in the past. In fact, I don't think he had done any painting up until this point. Now he's much more familiar with the process and how it works. But at that point in the beginning, he really didn't know. And so he asked us to show him how to do some of these things. So I went, my son Andrew went, and Andrew's been painting on a paint crew for a couple of years now, so he knows what he's doing. We went to show Caleb what to do. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. I get there and I open the can. I knew this color. I knew it was going to take 3 coats or more to get full coverage. And so I'm anticipating that we're going to be there forever. And we start brushing out, doing the cut-in work around the room. And both of us, Andrew and I, are both stunned at how well it's hiding. And by the time we got everything rolled, 1 coat, we almost could have snuck by with 1 coat. Almost. Now, that would have been wrong. It wouldn't have been the right thing to do because 2 coats are going to give you a truer look at your color. It's going to give you more durability and all of that. 2 coats, always the way to go. But we almost could have snuck by with 1 coat. I was so happy about that. Now, Caleb also had a dining room that the previous owner had painted a bubblegum pink. Pinks are notoriously hard to hide with a new paint color. And again, we were expecting 3 or more coats, but we almost got that one with the Optima. So bottom line is this. If you've chosen a deep color, a saturated color, a color that might not cover and hide very well, and you're concerned about having to apply a lot of coats of paint, or if you're painting over a color that you're worried isn't going to go quietly, give Optima a try. It's priced very reasonably. You're definitely going to get by with fewer coats than you would have with other paints. We learned some things about other products that I'm going to talk about on a future episode, but that's enough for now. All right. Do you have any idea how much benefit we gain from having greenery in our homes? I think you're going to be surprised. We're going to get to that right after this. Home in Progress is brought to you by Repcolite Paints and Benjamin Moore. Think about it. You spend hours prepping, sanding, taping, and then finally painting. Don't throw all that work away with an inferior product. The paint isn't just another supply. The paint is the project. Make sure it's the best. And we're back. You're listening to Home in Progress by Repcolite Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And for the last little bit, last few weeks, we've been talking about what your brain actually wants from the spaces that you live in. And I know that's weird, but there's this, physiological thing going on. It's not just about taste and preference. There's literally something that our brain is looking for, our nervous system is looking for in a space. And when it finds it, we automatically feel a little more comfortable. Design and preference and all of that, aesthetics, they're all important. But the fact that there is something going on beneath the surface, something that we really can't control, means it's worth digging into and figuring out. Because if there's little things that we can do that will make our brain happier, make a little happy brain for us, if we can make our brains a little happier in our spaces, our homes are going to feel more like home, more like what we want them to feel like: restful, peaceful, calm. All right? We've covered, in past episodes, coherence, which is the thread that ties a home together and lets your nervous system settle. We've talked about variation, kind of the other side of the coin. You can have coherence, but you do need to have variation, which is just moments of contrast that keep a space from feeling flat. Last time we talked about lighting, how it regulates your mood, your sleep, and your cognitive function at a biological level. Daylight's so important, but so is getting the right temperature of light bulb in the spaces in your home. All right, today we're going to talk about biophilic design. Biophilic design. Basically, it's just the idea of bringing natural elements into the spaces that we live. Things like wood, stone, plants, natural light, texture, even views of the outdoors. Bringing those things into our homes intentionally. And the reason that this matters, and the reason that I'm connecting it into this whole conversation about how our brain perceives our spaces is because, again, going back to studies, gotta love these studies that people are doing. Studies show that when you bring natural elements into a space, you get all of these benefits. People like it more. They feel better in it. They're less stressed, and they actually think more clearly. There's a particular study that I'm going to get into. It's just very briefly. It shows how bringing elements of nature into a space lowers heart rates, lowers blood pressure, and again, like I just said, lowers our stress levels. And the thing that I think is great about this study is it shows that this doesn't just happen over weeks or months. Just being in this space for months at a time, finally I have less stress. No. In this particular study, people were put through some kind of stressful task, and then they were placed into different rooms. The ones that were placed in spaces with natural elements, things like wood, light, greenery, they recovered faster. They got over their stress, over their anxiety faster. And here's the fun little factoid for you. Those changes started happening. How long do you think it took? Before I give it to you, how long do you think it took them to start feeling less stress and less anxiety? In about 4 minutes, they were already healing, recovering, whatever you want to say, from their stressful task. Basically, I think their stressful task was probably trying to remember passwords that they had to create. First they're tasked with creating passwords for a number of online accounts, and then later they've got to access those accounts using all of these complicated passwords they created. Incredibly stressful, drives us out of our minds, and when they were removed and placed in an area with a lot of natural elements, they recovered from their stress and their anxiety in about 4 minutes. They were already on the road to better. The other people in the other spaces, they were still 4 minutes down the road, 10 minutes, 20 minutes down the road, still stressed and anxious. That's what natural elements, that's what this whole idea of biophilic design can do for us in our homes. It can help us calm down, help us settle. So those are just some of the benefits of biophilic design. And that all sounds pretty good. But how do we go about doing that? How do we go about implementing that more thoughtfully in our homes? Is it just about bringing in loads more plants? Like trays and trays of plants? Will that bring about all these good things? Well, plants are part of it, definitely part of it, and we'll talk about them at the end. But there's more to it than just that. And to help us all do a little bit better, putting this idea of biophilic design to work in our homes, I've got a few practical ideas. And the first one revolves around color. Earth tones, soft greens, warm blues, taupes. These are the colors of the natural world. moss, soil, sky, bark, stone, whatever. And when those colors are on your walls or in your space, your brain gets a signal. A quiet, it's subconscious, it gets this signal that says that this environment is connected to something natural, something familiar, something safe. Stark white walls don't do that. Cool gray walls don't do that. Or at least they don't do it as much and not as easily. They're not bad colors or bad choices, but they're not bringing in elements of nature in the same way and at the same level as earthy, more natural tones will. So if you're thinking about repainting a room and you want to lean into this idea of biophilic design, well, go towards the natural world with your color selections. Look out your window and pull colors right from the view. Unless your view is just profoundly horrible. Maybe that's half your problem if you've got a profoundly horrible view. Look out another window then. Or go to somebody else's house and look out their window. Or just Google nature and go to Google Images and pull your colors from there. The greens, the blues, the tans, the natural colors. And I know what's being said right now. I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, I don't like those colors. I really like stark white. I really like gray. On and on and on. You like those colors. And that's perfectly fine. This isn't the only way to choose colors, and these aren't the only color schemes to draw from. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just talking about how our brains are naturally wired. And one of the things that makes our brains really happy and really calm and really peaceful are colors that remind it of the natural world. These aren't the only things that help our brains relax. I'm not saying that. They're just some of them. So use the colors if they appeal to you. Skip them if this doesn't appeal. All right, a second idea for some ways to bring biophilic design more intentionally into our homes is something you might call swapping a surface. And this is something we can do pretty easily and pretty much without any kind of real effort or real work. We're already making these decisions, not every day, but probably once or twice a week, we're making a decision along these lines. What I'm getting at is this. Let's say you've got a rug that you need to replace. What do you replace it with? Do you buy a synthetic rug? Or do you buy something that's wool or jute, something that's natural? When you add a shelf to a space, what are you getting? Are you bringing in a painted MDF shelf, or are you bringing in something that's real wood, with wood grain that you can see, something that has texture and variation to it, natural variation to it? When you pick a countertop material, if you're making a big choice like that, do you go with something perfectly uniform, synthetic, or do you go with something natural with a little bit of movement and variation in it? If your goal is to lean into biophilic design a little more intentionally in your home, then choose the natural option when you're on the fence. A wool rug underfoot, a real wood shelf with character and graining, a natural stone countertop with some veining and all of that. What we might even consider inconsistencies, with all of that. Those things are gold when it comes to biophilic design. Each one of them is adding that natural tone, warmth, color, and that natural variation that our brain is looking for whenever we walk into a space. And you don't have to do this all at once. Don't make a lot of changes all at once. Just do it when the time comes up. When the situation calls for replacing this or that, just keep the natural options front and center. It's a direction that you're leaning into, not something that, you take a weekend and just swap everything over in your home. That's not the point. Just do it case by case as the situations allow. Okay, I've got 3 more practical ways to implement biophilic design in your home, but we're going to get to those right after this. You're listening to Home in Progress, where the projects are real, the mistakes, they're educational, sometimes painful, mostly educational, and the only thing more stubborn than that old wallpaper on your bathroom wall is your determination to get it fixed. Proudly sponsored by Repcolite Paints and Benjamin Moore. Paint with a purpose, people who care, and everything you need to get the job done right. Welcome back. You're listening to Home in Progress by Repcolite Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And we're talking about what our brain wants from the spaces that we live in. And specifically today, we're talking about biophilic design. The idea that natural elements, wood, stone, plants, texture, color, all of those things do something real to our nervous system. They calm us down, they help us think more clearly, and they make us feel better in our spaces in ways that we can't always explain, but we absolutely feel. Now, we've talked already about 2 practical ways to bring that into your own home. First off, leaning into earth tones and natural colors when you're choosing paint colors for the wall. The second thing was making small surface swaps whenever you're swapping out things like a rug or maybe shelves or something like that. Instead of going to a synthetic, bringing in more natural materials wherever you can. Now, along those same lines, let's get to the third idea that I've got, and it's this: let a little imperfection into your home, on purpose. Let in imperfection. There's a Japanese design philosophy called Wabi-Sabi, Wabisabi, Wabi-Sabi. It's built entirely around this idea. And the concept is really simple. It's this: beauty lives in imperfection. Beauty lives in natural variation, in the marks that time leaves behind. That's where true beauty resides. Not in perfection, but in these imperfections. So cracked pottery, worn wood floors, a ceramic mug that's slightly uneven because it was made by hand, a hand-knotted rug, a lime-washed wall, a wooden table with a knot in it. These things are richer than their synthetic, perfect counterparts because they carry evidence of how they were made, where they came from, and how they've been used. After years and years of chasing perfect in design, people are starting to realize something. Perfect doesn't always feel very good to live in. So design is starting to shift a little bit away from sterile minimalism and towards spaces that feel warmer, more natural, and a little more human. It's what our brain wants to find in a space, and as we've been saying, when it finds that, it's going to settle down. So embrace the imperfections, the handmade stuff, the natural wood, the hand-woven things, the natural stone. Choose materials that offer some natural variation. And also, let go of the idea that everything needs to match perfectly, that every line has to be exact, that every surface has to be flawless. I am speaking to me primarily right here. Not that everything is flawless at my home, it's not. But I so struggle with this, that if every line isn't exactly perfect, that somehow something has gone wrong and I need to agonize over that and fix it. I'm probably better off with those uneven lines, at least to some extent. We're not looking for sloppiness here, but we are looking for just the freedom of some imperfections. Just let go of the idea that everything needs to be perfect. None of it's going to mean that your home is unfinished. It just means your home is going to feel alive. And that's a really different thing, and it's a really desirable thing. So that's the third idea: embrace imperfection. The fourth way to bring biophilic design into your home is to protect your views. And this is so simple, so free, basically, completely free. If you've got a window with a view of something green, a tree, a yard, even your neighbor's garden, whatever, treat that view like it's gold, like it's a design asset. Don't block it with heavy curtains. Don't put the blinds up all the time. Don't position furniture with its back to it. Don't let clutter build up on the windowsill. The research on window views is really, really striking. Research shows, and we talked about it last week, but research shows that hospital patients who had rooms with windows that brought in natural light and the windows that had a nice view of trees, those patients recovered faster and needed less pain medication than other patients whose windows looked out on a brick wall. They were all recovering from similar surgeries, and the only difference was the light and the view. And the ones with the good natural light and a view of trees recovered 40% faster than their counterparts who are looking at a brick wall all day. That's a real effect. So if you've got a view in your home, protect it. And if you don't have a great view, if your windows look out on a fence or a parking lot or nothing particularly inspiring, you can create the suggestion of one, a plant positioned in your sight line, maybe a piece of art that depicts a natural landscape, a mirror angled to reflect something green from somewhere else in the room. Your nervous system responds to the visual signal even when it's not the literal thing. It's looking for the cue, so give it the cue. Protect your views. Last idea that I've got, plants. I saved this idea for last, not because they're unimportant, but because I wanted to make the point first that biophilic design is bigger than just plants. But plants do matter. Of course they matter a lot. Even a couple of them in a space can make a measurable difference in how people feel in that space. And you don't need a lot of them. You don't need rare plants. You don't need anything super special. You don't need to be great at keeping them alive, though that does help. It helps a lot. But get something, a snake plant. a fiddle leaf fig if you're feeling ambitious. Who knows? A few small ones on a windowsill. The goal isn't a botanical garden here. The goal is just some living, breathing, growing things in the space. Something that reminds your nervous system that life is happening here. And if you've genuinely got a brown thumb, if plants die in your care at the first sight of you, if they see you coming with water and they just propel themselves off the edge or the windowsill, or they just die and shrivel right then. Well, the research shows that even artificial plants can produce some of the visual, benefit. Not all of it, but some. So even that's better than nothing. Get some plants, hopefully living ones. I had a vine, not a vine. I had an ivy plant that I had for 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, felt like forever. And I was horrible with it. I was terrible to that poor thing. It eventually died. It died, funnily, that's not a word. Funny enough, it died because I moved it, because I was so sick of forgetting about it. I'd see it and it's all shriveled and brown and I haven't watered you in 4 months. And I'd pour water on it and it'd come back. I don't know why it kept coming back. It was just a glutton for punishment, but it would come back. And eventually I felt so bad that I would forget about it. So I moved it to a more prominent location where I would remember it. And like I said, funny enough, moving it, I completely forgot that I moved it and never ever saw it again. And 5, 6, 7 months later, I found it and it truly had given up the ghost for good. All because I tried to save it. But it lasted 10 years, just a little viney thing. Get something green and keep it in your home. All right, as we wrap it up, let me try to pull all of this together. We've been talking in this little series that I've got about what your brain wants from a space, and we've focused on coherence, right? A thread that you can follow, that your brain can follow through the home. We've talked about variation, just enough surprise to keep your brain engaged. We talked about good lighting, the biological foundation that regulates everything else, and now we've talked about biophilic design, the natural complexity, the familiar signals, the materials and colors and living elements that tell your nervous system it's somewhere safe and alive and comfortable, okay? None of these things require a renovation. I know some of this is really out there, but it's all real. It's just a matter of what you want to apply and put into practice in your own home. None of it's going to require a big budget. It does require paying attention to the decisions that you're already making and nudging them, intentionally in the direction of the natural world. So a color that connects to something in nature, a material with some natural complexity to it, a view worth protecting, a plant or two. They're all small, small moves, small steps, small things to put into practice, but they're working on your nervous system every single day, and that's worth taking seriously. Now, next week, we're going to wrap all of this up, and I'm going to focus on paint color specifically, why it matters, how to think about it, and how to use it to pull everything we've talked about together into a room that actually works for you. But for right now, I think that's going to do it. And as we get to the point of wrapping up the show, I want to encourage you to go find the show as a podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, so Spotify, the YouTube, Audible, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. You can find it there, Home in Progress, and then you'll have access to all of our episodes. And you can listen and listen and listen. I mean, you'll go crazy listening. There's so much stuff. This was episode 453, so there's a lot of material out there. And some of it's pretty good, So you got to wade through it. But it's going to be like finding gold amongst the dross or the dirt, once you do stumble on a good episode. No, I'm joking. Every single episode is amazing to somebody. Anyway, if you don't know what a podcast is, just remember you can find us on the YouTube. So just go to the YouTube, and we just don't have video to go with it. It's just audio, but you can listen right there. You don't want to watch me make the show anyway. It's not always that pretty. But find the show as a podcast, and if you would, leave a review. It helps other people find the show, and it spreads the word. Also, last little bit of business, you can find Home in Progress on Facebook. And I've done a really terrible job with the Facebook page. I will admit that right up right up front here. I'm going to do a better job. Once I have more than 14 people following me, I'll figure it's worth it. So if you're a Facebooker, search out Home in Progress and then like and follow the page. And once I hit a reasonable number of people, I'll start paying attention to, the content that I put out there. Now, I know that's not how social media really works, but I figured I might as well ask. Find Home in Progress on Facebook and follow us. All right, we're at the end, and before I sign off for the week, I want to wish every single one of you a very blessed Easter. Of all the holidays, this is by far my favorite, and I hope you find peace and joy this Easter season. Enjoy your weekend. Make paint a part of it if you feel like it this weekend. I'm kind of giving you a little bit of an out here. If you kind of just want to focus on Easter this weekend. So paint's not required this weekend unless you really want to. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you next week. For Home in Progress, I'm Dan Hansen. Thanks for listening.